Good morning, everyone, and welcome to your morning report for Friday, the 27th of February, 2026. This is Robert. Jared and I are going to be covering the report today. Let's get right inside the Beltway. So, according to the Washington Post, some pro Trump activists who claim they are coordinating with the White House are circulating a 17-page draft executive order. And this executive order would grant President Trump emergency powers over elections. According to these two activists, the draft executive order would claim that China interfered in the 2020 election as the basis for these emergency powers, specifically to ban mail-in ballots and electronic voting machines. One of these activists is a Florida lawyer, Peter Tickton, who was part of President Trump's legal team in 2022. And he said he has a quote certain coordination with White House officials on this executive order. And a White House official speaking on background said that staff regularly communicate with outside advisors, but any reporting on this is speculation. Now, on the 13th of February, President Trump posted on social media, he said he planned to issue an executive order in the near future on voter ID, and specifically ahead of the 2026 midterms if Congress won't pass the SAVE Act. It's possible Trump is considering the legal argument that Tickton and another activist involved in this circulating this executive order for these emergency powers to do this. But the only thing Trump has actually said has been on voter ID, not on banning mail-in ballots or electronic voting machines, which I think would very likely get the Trump administration caught up in a significant legal fight. But I do think it's possible. I do think one possibility here is that Trump is actually only considering an executive order on voter ID requirements or registering citizenship proof requirements for registering to vote. And Tickton and this other activist who talked to the Washington Post are getting this idea out there as an A/B test, so in a manner of speaking, with the Trump's base and some political commentators. If Trump did this, though, I do think this is one of those red lines, like we talked about last year when President Trump first started talking about the invoking the Insurrection Act in Minnesota and elsewhere. And I think this is a situation where if the Trump administration is considering this and they start it and only go halfway, this invites I think a significant amount of backlash. Over at the Department of Defense, Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei rejected the Department of Defense's offer to settle a dispute over the DoD's use of Claude AI. Specifically, they want Anthropic to remove some AI limitations for the DoD's use. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth set an agreement deadline for today at 5 p.m. And if they miss that deadline, Hegseth threatened to declare Anthropic a supply chain risk or use the Defense Production Act to force them to cooperate. The DoD did just this morning say that they are open to negotiations ahead of that 5 p.m. deadline. And a Department of Defense official, the way they're saying it is that Anthropic actually cut off negotiations here. And the central conflict of this appears to be about determining defense policy and the use of these types of systems. The Trump administration, I think, views Anthropic's limitations on AI as a de facto method of trying to control defense policy. And I have seen a couple of lawmakers come out, like Alyssa Slotkin and Tom Tillis, that are calling for more time in negotiations. I think that's likely as they get closer to the 5 p.m. deadline, because Anthropic is not backing down. And Claude AI is implemented throughout multiple agencies. There are officials warning that Claude AI is being heavily used, and immediately dropping it would take a significant amount of effort to clear out Claude AI from all of these agencies. And DoD also wants Claude AI because it seems to be significantly more capable than other companies' models, and that's what really started this conflict between Anthropic and the DoD in the first place. Also in Congress, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said that the House Democrats are going to force an Iran war powers vote next week. He said this is going to be a bipartisan resolution from Representatives Thomas Massey, Kentucky Republican, and Ro Khanna from California, and it will take place as soon as Congress convenes next week, which the House is not in session, so there are no House hearings today. and there are no Senate hearings today either. Moving over to the domestic side, the FBI is investigating suspicious materials found after a house fire in Irving, California, in an Irving, California gated community this week. A source familiar with the investigation said that investigators found possible indicators of chemical nerve agents and what they say appeared to be a homemade lab. The Irvine police requested hazardous material assistance after determining that these chemicals that were at the scene were concerning because they also found written evidence. They did not say what this was specifically. And some of the neighbors that were interviewed by media said that National Guard troops were also at the scene and they were wearing shirts labeled Weapons of Mass Destruction Civil Support Team. This is the latest of these types of illicit labs found. There's still, the investigation is still ongoing, so there's not a whole lot of detail right now. But if they are talking nerve agents, that is, and especially being a homemade lab, this is potentially a illicit lab that was being used to potentially weaponize develop chemical weapons for an unknown use. But there are still more details coming. Over in New Hampshire this week, the Department of Justice said that a 26-year-old individual named Blue Zeke Daly was charged with attempted murder of a federal officer. On the 21st of February, Daly apparently opened fire on a Customs and Border Patrol agent at the Pittsburgh, New Hampshire port of entry on the U.S.-Canada border. And the agent returned fire and wounded Daly. And this was after Daly had fled a traffic stop earlier in the day that was conducted by the same CBP agent. I have seen some independent reporting, including from Andy No, that Daly is transgender and that this is not being reported in the wider news coverage. This is important detail because Andy No made comparisons to a shooting that happened last year on the 20th of January, 2025 in Vermont, where a CBP agent was killed by two transgender individuals that were connected to a group called the Cult of Ziz. And it's possible that this is also connected. This is one of those groups that I have kind of kept an eye out for new reports on. And reporting on this group from 2025 included some interesting details like witnesses being interviewed by police after that first shooting, seeing movement of people and equipment using box trucks, long-term murders of properties in the Northeast. And they are linked to other murders and violent attacks. And I think it's something like 7 of people involved with this group are currently in the justice system facing charges for murder or assault. And it's possible that this is connected to this group, but there's not really a connection being made by the FBI yet. Moving over to other states, according to a leftist center group called the Local Solution Support Center, this is an anti-preemption political group that it tries to or lobbies and provides support for local groups that want to circumvent or end state preemption laws. So that 30 states are considering bills that would strengthen voting requirements or change how ballots can be cast. So 4 of these states, Florida, South Dakota, Mississippi, and Iowa, are considering bills that would require documentary proof of citizenship to register to vote or check U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services SAVE database to verify citizenship status when people register to vote. Kansas is actually considering a bill, I think their House passed it already, that would require citizenship status to be displayed on state IDs. So not exactly a requirement to prove citizenship when registering to vote, but when you're getting your driver's license or state ID, then you would prove citizenship to have that marked on your ID. And then Arizona is actually considering 2 bills, and these bills would require residents to vote only in their own precinct, because Arizona has, before the 2020 election, they shifted to a system where as long as you're voting in, they have like these centralized voting areas, voting locations. And now the Republicans in Arizona want to change that back to actually having to vote in a precinct. They also want to require voters to present ID when dropping off mail-in ballots. Over on the U.S.-Mexico border, according to people familiar with what happened, the Department of Defense shot down a Customs and Border Protection drone that was flying near the U.S.-Mexico border on the 25th. These people said that the DoD was not aware that the drone was operated by CBP and did not coordinate the firing of an anti-drone laser system they used with the FAA. This is similar to the incident a couple of weeks ago where there was that 10-day notice to air mission that was issued and then lifted within the same day. So there's not a whole lot of confirmation here yet on what exactly happened. It seems like there was a miscommunication between the DoD and Customs and Border Protection. Over in Minneapolis, it looks like the mainstream media is catching up with our reporting because CBS put out a report talking to individuals that are participating in this Bring the Heat, Melt the Ice week of action we talked about earlier this week. And they say that people from across the U.S. are traveling to Minneapolis to receive training from anti-ICE activists during this week of action. And CBS talked to some of the organizers, and they said that hundreds of people from outside of Minnesota are participating in these training activities. And this is something we've been saying for more than a month now, that the Minnesota organized resistance, or the Minneapolis organized resistance, there are people traveling from outside of Minnesota to participate in the anti-ICE rapid response groups, the direct action demonstrations, and the training events. And they've been there. The goal of that is to effectively use it as a train the trainer type of activity. So these people come from Georgia or Vermont, and they participate in ICE observer trainings or the rapid response groups, and then they take that training back to their home state or home city to set up their own organizations. And part of this week of action, they're also explicitly training people to set up the rapid response infrastructure. And the two people they talked to were from Vermont and Georgia, but it's very likely we're talking other states as well. As we've previously reported, this is happening in red states as well. And it's not just providing training for both local and outside activists, which has been happening for a while, but importantly, the anti-ICE groups, anti-ICE resistance, they continue to spread these zines and guides. And this acts as an avenue for a mimetic capacity expansion and force multiplier. Basically, activist groups and self-radicalized individuals in other states outside of Minneapolis or previously Chicago, they can pick up these tactics, techniques, and procedures and guides to building their own organized resistance infrastructure. And like other types of far left and activist activity, they are, can be inspired by the Minnesota organized resistance, what the far left calls the propaganda of the deed. Basically, when these groups can successfully, in their view, engage in resistance to ICE operations, like in Chicago and Minneapolis, which in Los Angeles, they inspire follow-on activities. Basically, they promote this as a success, of successfully pushing ICE out of Maine or ICE out of Minneapolis, and that is used as propaganda or propaganda of the deed to inspire self-radicalized individuals or activists in other states to do the same thing. And finally, over in Milwaukee, activists in Milwaukee, Wisconsin are continue to prepare for a possible federal surge. Local officials in Milwaukee hosted a bilingual ICE awareness community discussion this week, and the Milwaukee Common Council, that's what they call their city council, is considering a package of local ordinances to block ICE access to city-owned property. The Milwaukee Common Council president, Alex Brower, he said that local activists are doing a lot of the same things we're seeing in other cities. They're supporting mutual aid efforts. They're being trained to be what they are calling in Milwaukee, at least, ICE verifiers. This is their epithet for basically the ICE observers or anti-ICE activists. And then they're also picketing and protesting at the sites of what he called ICE abductions. This is another rhetorical evolution that has happened since the beginning of the ICE organized resistance in Minneapolis, as they've started calling immigration arrests abductions. For right now, as I said the other day, it seems I think the large name surges are likely over. But ICE operations are continuing otherwise. There are still reports coming from activists on the ground in Minneapolis and St. Paul, Minnesota, that ICE operations are continuing at a lower level than they were during the initial surge of 3,000 federal agents into Minneapolis in January, but higher than the initial deployment into Minneapolis in December of last year. The initial deployment of Operation Metro Surge, I think, was 150 federal agents, and there's still roughly 500, at least according to Board Czar Tom Homan and the ICE field office in Minneapolis. But I think for now, the large named surges are unlikely in the future for two reasons. One, President Trump said as much, even though this has still not gotten a large amount of national level coverage. He did, according to a couple of governors, say that he is not going to deploy large ICE surges into any cities unless they ask for assistance. But the ongoing DHS shutdown, I think, is also likely a major factor here, because while they still have $70 billion from the big beautiful bill, there are still constraints on how they can spend money, and I think they're not able to spend on deploy. Like they don't have the funds or the authorization for the funds for moving large amounts of personnel around to other surges. So until that's wrapped up, I think it's unlikely we'll see any more large surges. All right, Jared, if you could come on and take us through the global SITREP, please.
Yep, we're going to start off with Iran. Obviously, everyone's been kind of tracking that and worried about it. The U.S. and Iran left the talks with no deal. This is according to the Omani mediator. However, he did say that the sides are going to resume talks in the near future after they confer with their capitals. There are reports from the Navy's 5th Fleet Command in Bahrain that it has reduced its force to mission-critical personnel. We'll get into that. The U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem confirmed it is going to remove non-emergency personnel and family members. And China actually issued a public urging for all of its citizens to evacuate Iran. I think the strongest indicator that we would see strikes here is the one from the 5th Fleet, but it was not a direct statement from 5th Fleet. It was anonymous official speaking to Fox News, that if Iran were going to have a reason to retaliate against forces, i.e. they were struck, I would expect them to go on Bahrain due to the upgrade of the security relationship between the U.S. and Qatar that happened last summer. Also, the U.S. is taking tons of actions recently on the diplomatic stage. They announced a $5 million bounty for each of the two Sinaloa cartel leaders in Tijuana Plaza. Payments going to come through the San Diego division of the DEA, just keeping it very local there. However, any country that does provide it can actually get both those bounties. The U.S. is also sanctioning 5 additional members of the Nicaraguan government for, quote, leading the principal financial, communications, and military agencies that enable Nicaragua's dictatorship to repress its people. The U.S. is also considering removing a Swiss bank from the U.S. financial system due to its involvement with Russian and Iranian money laundering. And lastly, we are going to move on to a bit of a larger item here. There was a compilation of data that resulted in a fairly great report from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. They released tons of statistics about China's military purges over the last 4 years. Some of the big ones: since 2022, 87% of the People's Liberation Army leaders in just the 3-star position have gone missing or officially been purged. With just for those who are not aware, going missing is frequently called a potentially purged in this report, and that's because the Chinese officials, when they should be showing up to certain congresses, they just are gone, and then they're not seen again, but never officially confirmed to be removed from that position. Of the 176 billets designated for senior PLA leaders, 52% have gone missing or been officially purged, so over half. And of the 5 leader commands, 4 branches of the PLA, 4 support forces, and the People's Armed Police, which is also important, only 6 of the 28 military and political leadership positions are officially filled. The rest of them most of them are actually just interim, but there are even a few vacancies. Part of those vacancies, which let me pull this up into a zoomed position here, the Joint Logistics Support Force is completely vacant at the top. There's nobody even as an acting director on the political or military side. Now, this is a crisis of leadership for the Chinese. Quite frankly, they don't have anybody that is truly going to lead in a time of that could lead the potential Taiwan invasion. They don't have anybody that definitely will move in on it. Now, if they were to go to war under the current leadership structure, I think the inexperience of the men in these roles, because keep in mind, many of these men are actually being promoted rapidly. Some of them have even skipped ranks. The inexperience, the pressure to conform to a vague standard, because many of these were actually even handpicked by Xi and then later purged, and the gaps in critical leadership roles like logistics, I think will lead China to a total defeat if they even move on a medium scale conflict, like keeping with just a blockade or quarantine, not even speaking on a theater scale war, like would likely happen if they attempted that.
So I think the most important question here is: do you think the revelation of this what appears to me to be a massive purge of the leadership under Xi, does this make it more likely or less likely that they are on the 2027 timeline for some action against Taiwan?
I think the stats that we are covering here make it less likely, but we have to keep in mind that, frankly, this all comes down to Xi Jinping at this point. I'd like to direct everybody to the very top of this org chart. It's the Central Military Commission. There are two people left. It's Xi Jinping and the vice chairman for discipline. No other seats are filled. So the decision makers on that is just basically Xi Jinping and the guy who's going to punish everybody if they say no.
So you think this is potentially a move to centralize that decision making, so that Xi, when or if he decides to do it, that's basically it, that there's minimized dissension?
I think so. I think that was the intent, but I think he's also, when you make moves of this scale, he's also removing most of the experience for it. Very famously, the last two people were moved were both vice chairmen. They were the only two people in leadership to be confirmed to have combat experience. Nobody else in the PLA did. They were the only ones that could actually make an honest assessment of the military readiness timeline. So Xi Jinping can just say they are militarily ready, but they don't have the people to actually conduct any kind of operation, which is why I think that if they move, it is more dangerous, because frankly, they're almost destined to lose unless they escalate to de-escalate. So it could be catastrophic just simply because they can't afford to lose.
All right. Well, thank you for that great report, Jared. Let's move on to questions and answers. If you could pull up our first question, which I think was the obvious question we expected before the show started. Do you think the U.S. will strike Iran over the weekend?
I'd give it a 25% chance. And the reason I say that is that with everybody that was involved in the talks came out saying, hey, the talks were good. We made progress. Okay, that's a good sign. The Omani mediators are saying that there are more talks in the work, that like they will be scheduled. They have confirmed we will have them in the future. We just want to go talk to our capitals again. Okay, that's a good sign for de-escalation. The biggest indicator that something is about to happen, in my opinion, is Fifth Fleet, the U.S. Navy's name for its version of Central Command, is saying we're moving people out. That to me says that and if there was somebody to actually make the call on whether or not a strike is going to happen, that's not the president basically saying, hey, yeah, we are about to do it, it would be the Navy. Let me pull. Yeah. This map is about the naval forces assembled in the region there. So that would be, I think that points toward it being basically a button push away if the president decides it's going to happen. But I think generally we're trending toward not striking them this weekend.
My impression of the Trump administration is that they do not want, they want, this is the order of priorities. I think they want a deal first, and then they want a discombobulation if necessary. And then at the very bottom of the list of preferences is a, some type of extended military action. But there is, like Senate Majority Leader John Thune yesterday said, there's apparently in the Republican Party some pressure or attempts to tell Trump that if there is military action, it needs to be regime change. And that goes against what I think the Trump administration has been doing on a grand strategic level for the last couple of months. The Maduro operation, I think, is kind of the proof of concept for what they want to do. They want regime acquiescence, not regime change. But there is, I think, within the Republican Party, people who want regime change in Iran, whether it's ideological reasons or otherwise. And I agree. I think a strike is not completely unlikely, but a lower likelihood because it seems like the Trump administration wants to avoid military action if possible. And there's a lot of other strategic developments going on, especially with Fortress North America, that point to the Trump administration trying to get influence over states that were historically adversarial, like Cuba, Venezuela, that lead me to my analysis to that the Trump grand strategy is not regime changes, is minimizing military activity in theaters that the Trump administration has explicitly said are not priorities.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, next question, please, Jared. From Paulie Shortcuts. Is it likely these labs are preparing nerve agents for those undetectable vests Sarah Adams mentioned on Sean Ryan's show years ago for a terrorist attack? I don't know how likely that is, but it's not impossible. As Mike has put out that model of like, is something possible? Would it meet the, is the group who allegedly would do it? Does it meet one of their objectives? It is possible, but because there's so little detail right now, this could be a situation where local police have, they saw somebody playing around with chemicals, maybe even making homemade explosives to mess around with, and got excited about that, anxious about that. But I'm still waiting on what comes out of the FBI investigation, because if it is actual nerve agents, that is significant. All right, next question, please. From Bad Wabbit, do you know which embassy staff were told to leave Israel? It just says non-emergency embassy staff. Would that include the ambassador?
No, and I'm not sure that information would be public anyway, because you'd have to have the embassy saying, hey, we are losing certain capabilities when those people leave.
All right. BB Bay, is China also in trouble due to their percent of young military-aged men versus the elderly population? China needs to be nice to their young people so they will go to war.
Yeah, I've actually, what was it, almost a year ago, I think now, I talked about that. Their population pyramid is in dire straits, and frankly, they may even be worse than what they are publicly saying, just based on videos that have come out about, hey, where is everybody that we are told is here? I think it might be more skewed, and I've seen a lot of people say, and the worst part for them about this is that their biggest population cohort is actually now in middle age, kind of moving out of military readiness, not prepared for war. So the idea, China would just send them to war to kill them off, well, maybe, but also that makes them not very capable.
Yeah, so there's a lot of talk. I think we broached this topic before about fertility rate here in the West. There's a lot of talk about lower fertility rate, South Korea, Japan, but that's a global phenomenon, and that includes China. China also has a declining fertility rate, so they're experiencing, on top of their already existing demographic issues, they're going to be experiencing the same demographic issues everybody else is facing. So yeah, this is. They're going to run out of military-aged men eventually as they age out of military age.
Yeah. Oh.
Next question, please, Jared.
There we go.
From Griseo Nemo, what would happen in China if Xi Jinping dies with so many leadership positions empty?
Yeah, that's kind of a big question. I don't think anybody even in China is fully aware of what would happen in there, this is something that I see talked about in the China analyst circles all the time. Even the ones that are living in China going, we don't know who's going to take over after. Normally, this is where we would look, and he's just not there.
All right. Well, next question from Happy Gardner. Could Xi be foolish enough to rely on their AI to manage military action?
I don't know. I just don't know how advanced their AI is.
right, from Bad Wabbit. Obama fired / got rid of much of our leadership in his tenure. 2 questions. 1, do you think those leadership positions have been replaced again? Do you see Obama's move similar to Xi's because Obama got rid of over 200? Yes, they were replaced. That was actually pretty much the point of that, was to replace a lot of the top military and intelligence community leadership with people that aligned with the Obama administration's priorities. Max talks about that. Max would talk about this a lot, that when he was still in the intelligence community back then, he was in the transition between Bush and Obama, and he's talked about how it was like an overnight change. But those guys were replaced. That was, I think, the explicit point of that was not to leave all those positions empty, but to get people that were more amenable to the Obama administration's policy preferences into leadership positions. All right. And then from Miss the 70s, China's last combat experience back in the late 70s wasn't great. Well, that's an understatement. So it might be not that big of a loss, actually.
Well, so I think that's part of the issue, and actually I think it would go the other way, is that the modernization that the Chinese have had over the past 20 years now, 15, 20 years, it's been technologically incredible as long as you don't dig too hard. And I think for the most part, they've convinced themselves that since they are facially at technological parity with the United States, they would be able to compete on an almost one-to-one basis, particularly in the region, and overestimate themselves. One of the things that they put out publicly back in 2015 that is going to stick with me for probably the rest of my life. In 2015, keep in mind, they were already considered a blue water navy, so they could run far sea ops. They said, we have to figure out how to do damage control. That's keeping your ship afloat if you are struck by a missile, if you have an internal fire. They went to sea without knowing how to do that. So I think they could vastly overestimate their ability based on the technology that they have either stolen or copied, thinking that, oh yeah, we can go one-to-one, and just could get actually wrecked in that process.
All right. Next question, please, Jared. I think this is a follow-on to Bad Wabbit's other question. Considering China recent warfare exercises, do you think Xi's current moves are a result of those exercises?
Yes, I did not cover it just for length of time, but it does look like he's trying to maintain the appearance of readiness. But those exercises actually even did take a hit last year for it. Particularly joint exercises with Russia went down by, I think it was 30%.
All right. Well, next question, please, Jared. From Mike Wilson, any confirmation about Fifth Fleet ships at sea?
Yeah, he's got a repeated question here.
And any updates on Afghanistan and Pakistan conflict?
Yeah. Yes, when I won't pull the map back up, but you're over on the high side. Go check the map. Basically, every ship that you're seeing underway in that region is either from outside the region, or it encompasses the entirety of what's stationed in Fifth Fleet, particularly all of the LCSs that are named there. Those are Fifth Fleet ships. They're just stationed over there. I haven't seen any confirmation from the Coast Guard that all of their stuff is underway, but I expect it is. There is a Coast Guard contingent over in Bahrain.
All right. Any update on the Afghan-Pakistan conflict, other than the Taliban declaring war, basically saying they're going to conduct military operations against Pakistan? That's the latest update.
With everything going on in Iran, trying to keep tabs on Venezuela, I have not been watching the border conflicts between Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. I will take a look at it this weekend and see if there's anything that, if it looks like it'll escalate.
All right.
Here we go.
From Darren Miller, are you guys on Rumble? YouTube ads are getting insane. I believe we are on Rumble.
Yep. We stream to Rumble every day, which, let me double check. Yeah. Oh, so we definitely are live. Nobody's commented yet, but yeah, we're there every day.
Yeah, we're on. I think we stream on X, formerly Twitter, YouTube, and Rumble.
Yep.
And then our own website.
Yep.
And then from Todd White, are you guys factoring the hundreds of thousands of military-aged Chinese that invaded, as well as the tens of thousands of terrorists here? Factoring in that into our analysis in general, yes. But there's like the Sarah Adams thing, when she originally talked about that, it is concerning because the premise of it is true. The Biden administration effectively had open borders. I think it just, I think so, I forget who published it, but I think it was just this morning or last night. One of the forms they were using to identify people that the Biden administration was letting in was a checklist of like what kind of identification or what kind of identification documents they would use to say this is who I am when they were being flown in on those flights. Because I've not seen this talked about in a while, but during the Biden administration, Mayorkas, his DHS was establishing these regional processing centers outside of the United States. I think there were multiple in Latin America where people were going to those people from that are not American were going to those regional processing centers and going through the asylum process or getting into the temporary protected status programs and being flown directly in. I have not seen any talk about that since before the 2024 election, but that was happening. There were multiple other there were reports coming out of ICE and DHS in California that a lot of these special interest aliens, these are guys who they're either on the FBI terror watch list or they're from countries of concern for terrorism that were being told to let them go into the interior and await court dates years in the future. So that is something that we consider in our analysis here, because there have been instances since Trump has taken office where some of these guys who got in under like the Afghan refugee program had been rolled up for planning violent attacks. There was I think it was even around the 2024 election, there was two people here on Afghan refugee permits basically that were planning an attack on polling places in Oklahoma. Like that is something that I consider, but unfortunately, without access to without being able to sneak into the meetings of the FBI, I don't have a whole lot of details on what they're thinking about, like this most recent lab or the Las Vegas lab or the California illicit bio lab from a couple of years ago. All right,
glad you brought that up. That's the reason I was sticking around here.
There we go. Robert, did we purge those people? I mean, Obama's litmus test was, would you fire on Americans if ordered to? I'm not sure that the Trump administration has. Well, I say we, but the Trump administration has done that. There are things that the Trump administration is doing that I think long term are moving in that direction. One of the things is, so I've talked about this before. There's a difference between winning an election and controlling the machinery of government. So I think a lot of people in the United States, they see someone that they like or that they feel is going to act in their interest, win an election, and then that's it. And they dust their hands and it's over. But what's actually important for getting policies implemented is controlling the machinery of government. That's the bureaucracy or the deep state. And there are a couple things the Trump administration has done. Since January of last year, more than 300,000 federal employees have resigned or been fired and not been replaced, as far as I understand. At least not a significant amount of them. ICE started this with ICE by dropping the degree requirement for ERO agents. It's the removal operations. And then there was talk at the end of last year about doing the same thing for the FBI. That is something that would change the incentives for who applies for federal jobs. Like that's one thing the Trump administration could do in certain instances, because when you have, like, for example, the FBI that has a degree requirement, you have to have a 4-year degree. That wasn't always true. And when that was implemented, decades ago, you started to see the shift away from the type of person that joined the FBI prior to that and the type of person that joined after. You had a large amount of, traditional college students, kids graduating college at 22, 23, going into the FBI, going into the intelligence community. I think that change is trying to shift the incentives for who joins, that people that align more with, are more conservative, align more with, Trump's political preferences. Like, for example, the FBI, I would expect once they actually implement that, to see a lot of people who have no degree, but that have law enforcement experience, are older, likely more conservative, to join the FBI. Same thing with ICE and other DHS agencies. And that is actually a much longer term impact than just going in and purging the leadership and replacing them with your own guys, because now you're talking a long-term project of doing the same thing that the current current political culture of the deep state or the bureaucracy got into place, was having people join or incentivized to join that align with their politics and work their way through into leadership positions. Now, how effective that's going to be, that's still, I think, still up in the air, just because we're now just past the first year of the Trump administration, and they've only implemented that at ICE, at DHS, and talked about it at FBI. I'm not sure if they have actually done that at FBI yet, but that seems to be the approach the Trump administration is taking, is a longer term project. All right, next question, please, Jared. From Minster Killer. Hey guys, I've been gone for a minute. Is the app out? Any updates for anything like that? I think the new site is still in beta, and Mike has said that there is an app coming. I'm just not sure about what the timeline is.
Yep, the app will come after after the new site moves out of beta into full operational readiness. And we do have a couple of developers working on a few extra features that, just as we've been having our subscribers beta test it, there have been features going, hey, we want this, add it, develop it, make it better. That way, when we launch, we hit the ground running.
All right. Next question, please, Jared.
All right. We are all caught up.
Well, if that's the end of our questions for today, we'll give you guys a couple more seconds. But if that's the end of questions, then we will be back with you on Monday in your inbox and on the show at 08 Central. Have a good weekend and stay out front.